Hello, my name is Sasha Struthers. I'm an attorney here in Los Angeles, and I'm going to do a quick video on the difference between tenant buyouts and relocation, as people often think they're the exact same thing and they are not. But they kind of somewhat overlap a little bit. So to begin, you have in California several areas that are rent controlled. Then you have the statewide rent control, which I'm not going to go into depth about either one of those, but if you're a landlord, you know what I'm talking about. So under rent control, if you're going to move a tenant out or evict a tenant based on no fault of the tenant's own, then you have to, and it's permitted, you're legally doing this, then you have to give the tenant relocation. The common ways relocation are awarded to a tenant or given to a tenant is when you're moving in yourself, you're going to move in a family member, you're going to substantially rehab the unit, or there's a government order that requires the tenant to move out. These requirements all change depending on the jurisdiction, depending on the rent control, and the amounts vary also depending on local rent control. So that's when you need to pay what's called a relocation fee, and you're relocating them permanently out of your rental. Now, a tenant buyout is when you have no grounds to relocate the tenant, and so you want to buy them out of the lease. The reason why people often think they are the same or overlap is because, for instance, in Los Angeles City, you have to give a tenant a disclosure, a tenant buyout disclosure, every time you present an offer to a tenant to want to buy them out. The disclosure states what the relocation fees would be should the landlord relocate the tenant. For instance, if they pursue an eviction for moving a family member out under the Ellis Act, they're taking the unit off the rental market, there's a government order, things like that. The reason why people often think, relocation is required is because of this disclosure. However, when you're doing a voluntary tenant buyout agreement, there is no minimum. So it's voluntary in the sense both parties agree to the move out amount or the buyout amount. And it could be less than relocation, or typically is more than relocation. But when you're doing it voluntarily and both parties are agreeing, there is no minimum. But the reason why the relocation tends to get confused is because, like, for instance, in LA City, it's in the disclosure. So then tenants kind of know, well, that's what you need to pay me if I were to relocate under some other reason. So that's why that tends to be the number, or the number is a little bit higher, is because of the disclosure. Otherwise, in other areas that don't have rent control, there is no minimum, there is no relocation fee to kind of gauge more or less what the negotiations would be. So relocation is when it's mandatory because you're evicting the tenant or you're giving them an eviction notice for some permitted reason, but no fault of the tenant. Tenant buyout is when you and the tenant are agreeing on a dollar amount for the tenant to move out and return possession in the unit to you. So those are the two differences, which hopefully is very clear to you. I will say for buyouts, those tend to be, even if you have grounds for the relocation, buyouts tend to be easier in the sense you can avoid having to file the eviction if they don't move out. Right now, at the time of this video, sorry, I hope you can't hear that. I don't know if something's being kicked outside. Anyways, at the time of this video, there is an eviction moratorium, so you can't give an eviction notice even if you wanted to in many areas in the state. But the buyout can be expeditious, and tenants have kind of more of an incentive to cooperate and move out because there tends to be a little bit more money on the table for them. And you can agree on a longer time for the tenant to move out, making it easier for the tenant to actually move out, because at the end of the day, assuming you could give an eviction notice, if you have to evict on that notice, it could be several months even after. So the tenant buyouts are really beneficial to the landlord and, in my opinion, to the tenant, because oftentimes tenants want to move out anyways. They can go somewhere maybe a little bit nicer, maybe more convenient for them. They don't have to worry about, giving, 30-day notices or things like that. You tend to be able to create your own terms to address a lot of the things that usually worry both landlord and tenant. So if you have any questions about this, or if you want assistance in doing a tenant buyout, and you are just very confused by all the requirements in your area, which is very common, by all means, please feel free to reach out to me. I do tenant buyout services, do them all the time. They are pretty interesting, and I think I probably enjoy those the most out of all the random legal things I do for landlords. I think tenant buyouts are a little more engaging for me personally. But anyway, that was kind of a side note. Yes, so if you have any questions, by all means, please feel free to reach out, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.